So we're going to talk about a constantly changing reality today, and it's being written every day. So I think, as Alex pointed out, it'd be great if you stop me, ask questions along the way. I'm going to share my screen in a second, and I've prepared a few slides. But I think, as we've got people all over the world here, and people from different industries, this is just my views, my thoughts. And so I'd really appreciate if you had any insights that you could share them, because I would also learn from this. So let me try and share my screen. I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
So Alex, as Alex briefly mentioned, I've been an investor and an operator for a long time in 3 geographies. And as an operator, mostly on the healthcare side in nursing homes in Europe and in China, and have been now in Asia for the last 5 years, and was with Alexander at Verlinvest, and now kind of launching my first real entrepreneurial project called Venturi, which is a consumer growth focused fund. So here we go. So first, a few disclaimers to start off with. I'm not a PhD or an HBS alumnus, so forgive me for that. I think really what I'm going to try and talk about today, and give you a few kind of ideas. These are derived from, me being industry focused. So I've only done consumer in my life. I've never done anything else, and so I think I've been kind of learning, reading, identifying long-term consumer trends for the last 20 years. And of course, what we're going through now with COVID-19 has accelerated a number of these trends. And so I think that's really what I want to try and kind of, I'd love if that's what you can take out of today, is really, a few of the emerging trends that we're going to see over the next 6, 12, and 24 months. I also talk, of course, a lot to founders, to entrepreneurs, to CEOs all over the world, to see how they're reacting, how they're adapting, and try to kind of, take some learnings from that, and really then try and see what are the long-term trends from the short-term ones. What are the fads that I think will not be impacting us for the long term, but what are the ones that we should all really have in the back of our head as we make decisions on a day-to-day basis, whether it's from the consumer side, but also whether it's from an HR side. So I think a few of the kind of key takeaways I'd like to kind of, leave with you today is maybe that, I'm sure most of you will know all of this, but I think, consumer habits have been changed forever. I think this will have a long-term impact. Disruption is happening faster than ever before. I think that's one of the things that kind of COVID has done, is it's fast forwarded a number of long-term consumer trends that we've been seeing, and also kind of made them cross geographies faster than before. I think people and founders, entrepreneurs, CEOs should have no taboos in these times. It's a time of rapid disruption, and I think it's important for everyone to be conscious that being able to revisit your mission, your vision, and your values is important. Do not just focus on the underlying things, but really try and look holistically at what you are, who you are, and how you need to adapt at this, unique moment in our lifetimes. From a brand perspective, I think it's very important that we embrace the situation. There's no use in being passive. Consumers are changing. You need to be close to your consumers. You need to embrace what's happening. You need to adapt. You need to communicate, and you need to be seen as participating with your consumers. And that's really an important part of, I think, of a brand today, is you need to be out there. If you're not talking to your consumers, you will lose them. Especially as brand loyalty is at an all-time low these days. Another key fact, of course, is that, digital online is a first today. That's the new reality. Omnichannel is second, and offline is third. We all have to accept that and adapt to that. It's important to focus when you're trying to reach out to your consumers on native and intuitive digital experiences. So not only to try to take offline content and somehow shove it online, but really to create interactive digital experience for your consumers so you can engage with them. And it's not just a one-way thing, but it's really you're getting a lot of feedback as well from your consumers. Local is the new global. I think that's going to be the case for the next 12 to 24 months until we have a vaccine. And there will be a long-lasting impact of that, I think, in all of us. Flexibility versus lean. I think, we've all focused on cost optimization over the last 20 years. I think now flexibility and having a variety of sources in your distribution is as important as just having cost optimization. And we've all been waiting for a long time for virtual and augmented reality to kind of, come out. But I think that, we will now see really how it will impact consumer experiences going forward. And so I think that's also something that we're going to see accelerate much more over the next few months and years. I'd like as well to start maybe with a few open questions that, leave with you and just have in the back of your mind as we go through this. These are just, I think all of us as kind of CEOs, founders, but also humans, should kind of try and answer these. One is, of course, I have a fundamental question around, has this kind of pushed a huge productivity boost in all of, in a number of industries, as in, if you were to go back to 100% of the revenues where we were, 3 months ago, pre-COVID, would you have to rehire everyone, or would you have to kind of re-put in place the whole cost structure that you've probably taken off to be able to achieve the same revenues? And I actually think that the answer to that in a number of industries is no. What work from home policies are you going to keep for the long term? How is this going to impact your company culture, your company values? How are you going to downside your real estate space? I think, that's something as leaders we have to answer all the time. Inflation or deflation, one of the two is going to happen. They both have bad consequences. They also, I think all rather have one than the other. But how would you need to adapt and react in case of deflation? Are you ready for that? I think one of the unfortunate long-term impacts of COVID is that the focus for most countries and economies will be on rebuilding themselves to the level they were pre-COVID before investing in a carbon-free world. Low oil prices will also probably make renewable less attractive. So is there a way where either yourself as a human being or your company or enterprise can have a positive impact to still try and kind of push that agenda forward? And then lastly, of course, what disruption or new adoption has COVID-19 fast forwarded in your industry? So I don't know if you've seen this is from the Board of Innovation, but I think they've been really good at kind of, showing what's happening in the feedback loop of the low touch economy. So a number of health measures are kind of put in place by governments to try and limit the impact of COVID. This has a huge economic disruption and a huge economic impact at the macro, but also at the micro level. And this, of course, then impacts behavior shift. A number of reasons. Well, one is just closures of everything. You have to stay at home, but also from a financial perspective. And this is constantly evolving. And this will kind of, there's a top-down approach, there's a top-down impact, if you want, which is the health measures which are put in place by different governments. And then there's also a bottom-up impact, which is the changing behaviors of consumers. And so this will continue to happen over the next 12 or 18 months until we have a vaccine, which is widely distributed as we go through different waves of COVID. And so this is kind of a flywheel, if you want, where we're constantly going to have to reassess assumptions and see whether we need to continue to adapt certain things that we had taken for granted in our initial analysis. Once COVID is behind us, I think we will come back to some kind of normal, but the new normal will not be the same as the old normal. I think we'll get back to some of the things that we had before. So I think we'll get back to traffic jams. The kids will go back to schools. We'll have family parties. We'll visit the dentist as before. A number of new things will feel normal. Zoom being one of them. Hopefully for we can not do 8 hours a day because I guess we've all realized how tiring it is. But there'll be less restaurants. I mean, that's clearly the hospitality industry is going to be changed forever. And so I think, we'll have, and that will adapt relatively quickly. And then there's a number of things that will stay with us probably as well, which, won't feel normal. Security gates, health checks, mouth masks, etc., etc. And so I think this is also, you know, something that we have to be realistic about, independently of the industry that we are in, whether this is for consumers, whether this is for industries. We just have to realize and try and identify how the new normal will, what will the new normal look like for each one of us. So COVID-19 is and will have a profound impact on all of us, on our behaviors. And, you know, some of them are conscious, some of them will be unconscious. I think work is something where we'll have had a lot of time unwillingly to reflect on what is important for us. What is our work-life balance? Is our work something that we truly believe in? Working from home, digital nomads. I think, you know, the relevance and the importance of work might shift in a number of people's minds, given the experience that they've gone through. Health, of course, is something that, you know, we've all been, that has been very close to all of us in our thoughts over the last weeks, and probably will be for the next numerous months. You know, whether it's in products, you know, we're probably all eating healthier products. We're all trying to exercise as we've got a bit more time on our hands, you know, an increase on well-being, but also, you know, do I trust the product that I'm buying? Is it safe? Is it clean? Digital, I think, you know, everyone here will agree that we've all started ordering online much more than before. Video, for example, also, you know, and TikTok, as I'm sure you've all followed, has just gone through the roof. You know, digital is the new media. It was already there, but I think it's really been fast forwarded again by a few years. Money, I think that's also, you know, whether that's unemployment, so a case of having less money, a case of increased savings that will last for a long time, just to kind of pay off the debts that have been accumulated by consumers during this period, but also maybe to be better prepared for the next one. And I don't know if you saw the numbers that came out in Europe for Italy and France about savings, but it's just like, you know, exploding. And then also money as in cash. I think cash will probably disappear faster than ever before. Relationships, we've all kind of, I think, taken the time to realize what are the most valuable relationships in our life today. Of course, our families, but which friends, which relationships do we value the most? And as we've had, you know, limited means of seeing multiple people at the same time, we've really had to kind of, we've had time at least to reflect on what are the most meaningful relationships that we have. Rising tensions, unfortunately, I think is going to be a case of what we're going to be seeing over the next year, 2 years, and this will have long-lasting impacts. I think stress, anxiety, you know, do we get healthcare for all or not in the US? Populism on the rise, Europe going through a very difficult time, Italy is the next Brexit. I mean, you know, these are things that will have a long-lasting impact. And then, of course, lastly but not least, you know, entertainment and travel. You know, with all the restrictions that are in place today, and that will probably stay in place or that will come back in waves. Well, you know, arts, gatherings, bars, restaurants, travel, all of this, of course, are having, you know, profound impacts on a day-to-day basis. So all of this, you know, is creating really long-lasting consumer change, habits change. And I think, you know, there's 3 things really that kind of are kind of fundamental. I think as customers are really rethinking what is essential and not essential for them. You know, they're not going to spend as much on non-essentials, you know, for the moment. You know, for example, luxury is not doing great in places which are in lockdown. Fashion has suffered in places which are not in lockdown. But even then travel, right? Will people travel as much as before, given the fact that, you know, they might want to save more? I think brands will be held to higher standards and new standards, mostly around trust, quality, safety, local technology. And so how do you adapt to that? How do you communicate about that? How do you participate in this change? I think will be fundamental for you to be able to continue to engage with your consumers over the next years. And then, you know, accelerating innovation adoption. And I think, you know, we've just had a fast forward on a number of key trends that have been there for a number of years, but it's just pushed everything forward very rapidly. And so I think they're really kind of, you know, 3 major accelerators that are kind of pushing forward these consumer trends. One is really quality and efficacy. And so really that is kind of around trust, health, safety standards, and, it will also kind of, I think, fundamentally change the consumer's mindset on what they perceive as value. Do they want something which is cheaper, but which has less kind of hygiene or health benefits or whatever, or will they be willing to spend more on certain categories? Whereas in other things, of course, they'll just completely disappear. So I think it's important, depending on the industry that we are, that we really try and kind of view or kind of understand as much as possible and be as close as possible to your consumer to understand how is that going to impact you. Local, I think, whether it's in supply chains, whether it's from kind of consumers' perspective, more than ever, shoppers and consumers want to understand the supply chain, and they want transparency. And that was already a long-lasting trend that we'd been seeing for some time. But again, it's being accelerated and will be accelerated as supply chains are disrupted and as consumers will want to have more transparency on where their produce come from. And then, of course, technology. Consumers will want to kind of, do as much as possible digitally and to kind of minimize the risk, any risks with anything else. So whether that is for retail, whether that is for hospitality, whether that is across industries, I think that's a fundamental shift in those aspects. We're going to see, new consumer segments. I know that, before it was mostly by socio-demographic kind of point of view that we were looking at it. I think now what's interesting is we're going to see a number of new mindsets appear depending really on how consumers react to this. So some just want to get back to normal. And that's, about a third of consumers. Their spending would be largely unchanged. Their daily lives were never really affected. They didn't lose their jobs. And, they're probably like, I guess in Singapore, I think probably most of us will get back to normal relatively quickly, but in other countries, of course, that's going to be less the case. Some are going to be what they call cautiously extravagant, and they'll remain very focused on health, but are relatively optimistic, knowing though that a global recession is coming. And they're probably going to reallocate their consumer, their spending, their discretionary spend to new areas. And so I think that's really what an important, part is to really try and find out how that consumer allocation, that kind of the consumer discretionary spend will be reallocated between the portfolio that it had before. Back with a bang, they're mostly younger and in work, and they're the most optimistic, and they just want to, come back and have a blast and just go and live their lives again because they've realized that they've just missed 3 or 4 months of their life. And then there's, more consumers, who are more like, stay frugal, spending less, have lost their jobs, trying to get back on their feet. They're very pessimistic of the future, and it'll probably take, 2 to 3 to 4 years before those consumers kind of return to any sense of normality. And then the last one is keep cutting, which is the least educated, and they probably have lost their job, and they're just going to have to, it's going to be very tough from them to recover. So these are a number of the changes that, we're seeing. I think, one is price is no longer as important as it was before. I think, stock availability is as much as important, and probably also, the health and the trust of the brand. I think fashion is going to go through, a very difficult time. Electronics, we'll see, it's suffering a lot now. But I think what's important to see is that even, the consumers that were the most optimistic, which are getting back to normal and cautiously extravagant, are kind of sensing themselves that they will change fundamentally the way they travel, the way they shop, the way they spend time with their family, the way they socialize. And so this is, the whole ideal concept that we had initially of saying, hey, this is a V shape and, we'll just pop back to exactly where we were. From a consumer mindset, unconsciously, these kind of, this has been ingrained and this is here to stay. An interesting aspect of COVID-19 as well is that the adoption curves has just, they've gotten steeper than ever before. Before, you had the usual kind of early adopters, and then it started going more mainstream for any new product or service. And COVID-19 has just fast forwarded that. And so now the adoption curves are much steeper than before. disruption will happen much faster than before. Consumers are willing to try many more things than before. So if your brand is not in stock, doesn't matter, I'm just going to try something else. And brand loyalty is actually, at an all-time low. And so for the moment, a number of private labels are actually doing extremely well. If you think of Zoom, we all knew about it, but how much time would we have used on it before? I think we can all agree that we will rethink our travel in the future. We will probably not fly as frequently just to go, or take a train just to go and see one person. We'll just kind of have a Zoom meeting, and that's been adopted as fast as before. And we'll kind of come through on a few other trends. But I think the rate of adoption, that's been accelerating for decades, has just been it has just accelerated faster than ever. Online is the new king. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, so nothing new for you, but I think it's important to recognize this because, I mean, I think over the last 10 years, there were still a few industries which were kind of thinking, hey, what the heck does digital transformation mean? But I think this crisis has defined it better than anyone could ever have. It's amazing how during COVID-19, e-commerce as a percentage of total retail has grown as much during COVID-19 as during the last 10 years. So that's just really, I mean, just a huge boost to e-commerce. Now, will we return to kind of, will it come down post-COVID? Probably, but it's just fast forwarded really e-commerce as a percentage of retail sales by 5 years. And that's just, just a huge leap. And so especially, I think, for some consumers that have been reluctant to try it, for more older generations, or to buy fresh produce, everybody has now tried it and actually seen how efficient, cost-effective, and easy and convenient it can be. And so I think everybody agrees that we can't all wait to go out in a nice retail shop and buy our own fruit and vegetable again. But why don't we keep, I'm sure everyone will continue buying some level of groceries. And so groceries, online groceries, which was probably 12-15% before, has just come of age, right? And what's interesting to see is that 63% of people who are spending more for online groceries say that they will continue to do so once the crisis is over. I think everybody's seen the convenience aspect and many other things. I think another aspect is for retail is how to integrate that because it was going to be very hard to have a pure offline strategy. So I think all major retailers, and we've seen it in the US with Amazon, with Walmart, the kind of the online sales for Walmart has kind of gone over 1,000% easily. Amazon, of course, has surged, but not as much relative to others. So I think every kind of other major player in certain industries which were resisting a bit this digital revolution, they have had to adapt. And so really adaptation, going digital is no longer an option. If you want to survive, you have to go. The impact across all industries, has been very high. And I think, of course, tourism and hospitality has been the highest probably. Automotive has been huge. Alcohol has been huge. We've heard a lot about that alcohol sales have gone through the roof, but actually, if you think of it, this is the retail side. So this is the off-trade part. So if you include the on-trade, actually, they're suffering, right? Because the on-trade has collapsed. So of course, people are buying more at home. So the numbers look good for retail, but actually, if you include the on-trade, it's not a very nice. It's not a rosy story at all. Education is also, of course, hugely impacted. And healthcare and FMCG. And so now I'm going to try and go through a few of these industries maybe and just give you kind of, some fundamental shifts in trends that I've noticed and on which, as what we're doing as investors, trying to identify those and trying to identify companies that are the best positioned to be able to react and adapt and kind of also benefit from these trends. So FMCG is one that has actually not suffered as much as other industries. I mean, people have been stuck at home, so they have had to buy more products. As you know, restaurants and bars have been closed, so people have had to eat from home. And so, you know, just these, as you see, in France, FMCG was up 22%, pasta was up 130%. Now it depends, it's not all across all categories, but generally most categories in the FMCG space have seen positive impacts. And if we look at the all companies in which Alexander and I were invested, in the Verlinvest portfolio, which had a pretty wide range of industries, although always with a consumer angle. But the ones that have done really come out of this crisis much stronger are brands like Oatly, Vita Coco. We had Muti, which is tomato paste. So a lot of these kind of FMCG brands. Now there's a supply issue, of course, that's the hard part, because they normally haven't been able to produce as much as they would have liked to. But at least from a demand side, it's been kind of, you know, they've been doing well. However, in that, there's of course a number of underlying fundamental trends which are here to stay. And so it's, you know, the impact will be different across different categories and distribution channels. There's a huge shift, of course, from out of home to at home. And so from food manufacturers and retailers, it's important to understand that this is something that is going to stay. People will continue to cook probably at home more than before. This is a shift that has happened and will continue to happen. Cleaning and personal hygiene, you know, I mean, we've all read, I guess, about, you know, face masks and hand sanitizer, but I think it's a whole trend across that whole category that we're going to continue to see over the next few months and years. Health, well-being, of course, you know, food quality, provenance, but then also kind of, you know, how do I take better holistically of my mind, my body, you know, whether it's yoga, fitness, etc. And, you know, digital, as I said, so really keeping social distance. So I think the whole retail experience is going to be fundamentally impacted. People will want to go out less frequently to shops and probably go to shops where they can buy everything in one go. So that is, you know, fundamental. So I think people will yearn to go back into retail, but they will not go back as frequently, and they will probably want to spend more in one go. So it's going to be interesting to see, you know, how that impacts retailers. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of them, especially the weaker. So the smaller players will probably have a hard time, you know, recovering from this relative to the stronger guys and to the bigger guys. So what we do with, you know, when we look at new opportunities, of course, with Alexander, is actually to kind of try and identify the ones that are benefiting from this and surfing these waves. And actually, we're looking at an opportunity now in Australia to invest in a company that is actually right on trend with all of this. With pure, so D2C brands, of course, which you'd seen emerge and which had already, you know, found a new way of reaching out to consumers, of creating trial, awareness, preference, now are actually much better positioned than, you know, traditional offline brands. Education is also a sector that's going to be hugely impacted. And what I'll do is I'm going to share, it'll probably take me 2 or 3 days because I was just putting this deck together for this, and I actually didn't want to make it too long. And so I have a number of other industry trends that I've got that I'm going to put in a deck, and then I'll shoot it to Alexander over the next couple of days or 3 or 4 days. And so if you want, you know, happy to kind of for him to share it with all of you. But on the education side, of course, you know, also major disruption. And that's across all industries. I guess most people here have children in the background, you know, playing or doing lots of noise. So I think, you know, K-12, we can say, has been hugely impacted. We saw it firsthand with Alexander because we've invested in a number, just before leaving Verlinvest, we invested in a number of education services in the US. For example, one of them was a summer camp business where you can imagine that, you know, there's nothing happening this summer. So it's gone from a $35 million revenue to 0 this year. So I think huge impact on education. However, you know, we think that, you know, the impact will vary widely by subsegment, and overall it has a fundamentally robust long-term outlook. So I think as part of discretionary spend, this is still going to be a big ticket item in people's mind. They still will want to invest in their children, in their children's future. However, some key trends that we've seen, of course, online learning has gone through the roof. Digital content, so even in K-12 space now, you'll have to kind of integrate digital curriculum. And I think the digital learning or online material part of K-12 will become natural much faster than it would have had we not had COVID-19. Individualized learning, of course, is still a kind of, going to be a focus going forward. That was a focus already, but again, it's going to be accelerated by COVID. And then digital support functions. The schools still had a tendency to be a bit outdated. They still had legacy systems. They still had all IT systems. And now I think, they're just going to have to accept that they have to adapt, and if only to cut costs. It's been actually very interesting to see one of our companies in which, again, we'd invested with Alexander, which is called Byju's, that you might have heard of, which is one of the largest edtech, well, it's the largest edtech company in India, but it's probably one of the largest edtech companies in the world. And Byju and all its competitors have given free access during the whole of COVID lockdown to any Indian child, to their whole kind of app. And, this has just had, trial has gone through the roof, acceptance has gone through the roof. And this, just as an example, tutoring in India is a $15 billion industry, right? So it's a huge industry, and all offline, of course. And so Byju's and others are just kind of now, all of a sudden, all of these children have tried it. And so there'll be going to be a huge fundamental shift. And so probably, will Byju be 2 or 3 billion revenues in 3 or 4 years? Why not? And so I think that's kind of, an example of what we've seen. Healthcare is also an area, as I explained earlier, where I've had some experience, and which we follow closely, mostly on the services side. So we're not on the, we're not on diagnostics or kind of products, but we're just really on healthcare services. But telemedicine adoption has surged. I mean, whether it's MyDoc or in Singapore or Indonesia, HelloDoc, or in Australia, HotDoc, or even in the US, it's just, adoption has gone through the roof. And what's interesting is that the biggest, the people that were the most resisting this change historically were doctors. The people that are now pushing this change forward are doctors, because they've actually scared to see patients. So they want to see these patients as little as possible. And so they're the ones now who have adopted this. And of course, if doctors are adopting it from a user perspective, it's gone great. And so I think, again, this is fast forwarded telemedicine by 5 years. It'd been slow in adoption, but now I think it's really kind of, taken a leap forward. And I heard that there were a few people in India, today. I guess, you've been reading the news about Swath, which is kind of, a new platform that has been launched in India. And so the Indian government partnered with leading private players and startups to launch a nationwide open source platform to create really a digital backbone for healthcare delivery in India. So this is launched, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, is about to be launched. And this is just, this is unique in the world, really. It's going to be a single platform on which any service provider can come and plug itself on for teleconsultation, e-medicine delivery, home-based lab tests, and many other things. You're going to have a unified healthcare record for every patient. So, where we all have the same pain of going every time we have to go to a doctor, we don't have the test that we did before because, we don't have really that unified healthcare record. Here, the idea is really that every single patient will have that on a central digital backbone. And it's integrated as well with an existing government COVID contact tracing app linked to COVID-19. So this is really kind of, this has disrupted the whole industry, and this has happened in a month or two. And it's really a partnership between the government and a number of private players. So this is, again, a great example, I think, of how we can see kind of, again, it's fast forwarded everything by 5 to 10 years. And it, it wouldn't surprise me that a number of other countries kind of take this and try and do the same things. Just to kind of talk a bit about where, we are currently currently in India and Southeast Asia, just because, I thought it would be interesting to share with you. But historically, in Asia has recovered better from great or from recessions, whether that's the dot-com crash or whether it's from the global financial crisis. Generally, Asia has recovered better, and actually this time we expect it to recover better. And so if you look at projections for next year, Asia is expected to be driving a big part of the growth in the world. And I think the US will probably rebound faster as it has done historically, but Europe will probably go through a bit of a difficult time where there'll be a huge amount of debt to be repaid. And then again, coming back to the question that I opened up with on inflation versus deflation, I think that will also have a huge impact on how governments can react. I think in Asia, it's less of an issue, right? They'll just have inflation and the growth and the kind of the amazing growth that we've seen in the past should rebound. Of course, they will suffer heavily this year, but we do expect for it to rebound. Another actually aspect of that is for the moment, Asia has been less impacted by COVID-19 than other geographies. So if you think of the places that have been the hardest hit, unfortunately, of course, are the US and Europe, and Asia as a whole, whether it's China, of course, where it originated from, but which has been kind of able to control it and suppress it to some extent, or whether it's Vietnam that has now kind of fully reopened. Of course, the biggest unknown is India, and how India will kind of be able to reopen or not, and if it reopens, whether there will be a big second wave or not. So that was really the few slides I put together, Alexander. I'd like to kind of make it a bit more interactive now. I'll just go back to the questions that I put, not that I want to kind of, and the key takeaways, so you have them in front of you, but I'd love to kind of open it up and maybe take questions, also hear comments and feedback from anyone who, who's here.
Maybe I'll shoot the first question. As you're in touch with so many entrepreneurs today, and you've gone through other crises before, what are you seeing as the main pitfalls, and what do you recommend to growth entrepreneurs trying to run their business through this crisis and preparing the post-COVID and strategizing about how to incorporate those changes that you've highlighted?
Well, I mean, I think luckily, we probably have, very smart people here. And so I'm sure everybody, will kind of already have reacted to the situation. But, Alexander, we have an example of certain companies that we know where entrepreneurs kind of, don't see the new normal. And they're trying to kind of say, hey, I'm just going to have to hold on for 2 months and then I'll come out on the other end, it'll be fine. I think the base case scenario of any company today should be a L-shaped recovery. Just, a long kind of, and then a U-shaped should be an upside. And so you should prepare yourself for the long haul. And of course, if there's more growth to be found, then, that's great. We'll all benefit from that. But I think facing that, accepting that is important. I think another important aspect is it's better to do, unfortunately, in all businesses, I'm sure everyone here has had to do the same, but all businesses have had to kind of, reduce their workforce and have to kind of take in some quite drastic cost restructuring measures. And I think an advice there is just do it once, do it big, and try and not do it kind of, gradually over multiple steps, because that actually creates a lot of internal tensions, kind of demotivation. It's much better from a human perspective to be able to kind of just do it and then rebuild, remotivate, try and re-energize and regrow from that. So I think that's one thing. Don't do little steps, but just do one big step. And I'm sure most people here have already done it. I think, just, I don't know, what industry most people are in, but just make sure that whatever industry you are in, you are the most digital player in that industry. And don't try and say that, you've got another few years before it'll happen. No, I think investing and making the right investment. I mean, we all know how horrible and painstakingly slow it is to install an ERP. Actually, you remember, Alexander, we installed one together in Harmonia, and the horrendous work it took us for 2 years. So, transforming old industries is slow and painful, but I think really taking that hands-on, and that is the CEO, right? That is his top priority now. So I think that's one. and communicating. I think you've got to be out there. You've got to be in touch with people. You've got to be leading the way in your industry, whichever it may be. So yeah, I think those would be the main ones.
Super. Yeah. Maybe we can turn off the screen share. We can see each other.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
No worry.
How do I do that?
Questions for Nick?
Nick, it's Gabriel here.
Hi, Gabriel.
Watch out, Nick.
I know. I've already realized. I'm just trying to finish the screen share. I don't know why. It doesn't seem to be working. Apologies. How do I do that? Well, go ahead, Gabriel. I'll try and continue.
You have a bottom there saying stop share. Stop sharing.
Yeah. Here we go. I'm back. Perfect. Found it. Okay, perfect.
Thanks for the presentation. It was amazing. My question is regarding the world that we're going to live with increased inequality and increased unemployment. So besides the consumer trends, the reality on the ground for 1/4 of world population will be way worse. So how come companies should maybe address, or how should they play? How should they adjust the communication that you just mentioned? That will be really important in a world with where inequality will be an important discussion, and unfortunately, it will be we will be on a way worse situation than before the crisis.
I mean, there's different views on this. I find that, it's also linked to the values of your company. So, if I come back to one of the things is, put everything again in kind of, be willing to reassess your mission, your vision, and your values, because, maybe they were right for yesterday's world, maybe they're right for today's world, but maybe you should adapt that, and this part is a fundamental thing that as human beings, we're all kind of conscious of, that unfortunately, we're all the lucky ones here, and that, 20 or 15% of the population have lost their jobs and, their dreams. So I think from my perspective, it's being open and transparent and accept it, and it's the embracing part. I'm not saying embracing it happily, but I'm saying accept it and try and position yourself vis-a-vis your consumer as a real brand. Be real, be honest, be transparent. Don't try and just, some brands were kind of doing before. So from my perspective, that's what I would say. Be real to your values, review your values if necessary. Hopefully, for a number of brands not. And I think that's where a number of brands are kind of doing well today, is the brands that are the most in touch with their true values. And that's why, you've had this fundamental shift going on for years of emerging disruptive brands being able to engage more with consumers. And across every category, you've seen this, right? With the big brands just going, and the small kind of disruptive brands growing. And the main reason for that is because they engage better with their customers. They actually have messages which can be more direct, more bold, more engaging. Bigger brands, generally, they try and be a bit more, I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want to do this, And so, Nike is probably one of the only big brands, we always talk about Nike, Patagonia, or whatever, these brands that are kind of iconic, but that are still engaging with the consumers, where they do take bold steps. I mean, Nike in the US with, the athlete kneeling down and making him kind of, a front. So I think you've got to be bold in these days. That's all I've got to say. And you've got to be real. And so if that means reviewing a bit your communication message, so be it, right? I think that's the new reality. And yeah, that's kind of, if that makes sense. It's not easy, right? It's not easy because it can mean a shift from where you were, right? So I'm not saying you don't have to do it straight away, but I think you've got to find that way over a few months of how to adapt. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Nick, I think maybe other questions. Just unmute and shoot.
Hi, Nick. It's Brian down here from London. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I think during the your slides presentation, we spoke about the behavior. And the most difficult thing about all this, whatever industry you're in, is judging how long this is going to take to, I call it, to defrost. It's sort of like froze for a while, and now we're defrosting. We don't know what it's going to be like coming out. So if you're going to invest in a new business, you've been through all your different categories you go to, but when do you choose to invest? Because there could be COVID-20. We're still in 19, but it's a difficult call to make if you're going into a new industry, and you actually don't know what your old industry is going to turn out like. So I guess my question is, it's not like the weather. The weather, I can see outside what it's like. I can make a judgment what to wear. But I'm going into the work and I'm advising my business how to go. It is step by step. Although you have to be bold, you have to be dexterous to be able to go 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because the behavior is difficult to judge. So how do you judge the behavior? And what would you look for?
I mean, I think the reality is that I would prepare for the worst, right? It was my base case is an L-shaped, right? Let's just say that there's going to be 2 or 3 years of wave after wave after wave. Now, they're probably not going to be as bad as the one we've gone through right now, because governments can't impose another lockdown like this. They've just realized economically it doesn't make sense. And then we'll have the ethical question that's already arising everywhere is, what's the value of a life? And, and what's the long-term impact, right? And are we actually loading our children with debt versus kind of, saving, an older population today? So I think government will kind of do a lot of A/B testing over the next few months to see, as they reopen, what's working, what's not working. And so that's why I said, just try and think of it as the new normal. And my view is that the trends that COVID has accelerated will stay, but will be further accelerated the longer COVID goes on for. And whether there's a new pandemic in 2 or 3 years' time, those fundamental trends are still going to be there. So from a consumer perspective, or from an industry perspective, we're still going to be around, we're still going to be working. Yes, there's going to be a huge depression or a recession, or what, we don't know yet how bad it's going to be, but we're still human. So we're still going to kind of, have to eat, have to kind of do everything that we've done. We're still going to go work. All industries are going to find new ways to adapt and to continue. So will we come back to 100%? Yes. How long will it take? Nobody knows, but we're still going to come back to the 80, 90% normal rate. So I think the question is, in every industry, what are the underlying trends that have been fast forwarded by COVID, and just make sure that you prepare yourself to become best in class in those trends in any industry you may be, right? And whether it's shipping, and whether it's I don't know, anything, right? Everything is being and you can think of airlines, travel industry and retail and hospitality. That's just that they don't know what it's going to look like. They still don't know how they're going to be able to adapt, and they know that before they can get back. I actually believe that traditional retail might never make it back to 100% offline retail, right? Because online is just taking that huge chunk, which might never come back. So how do you adapt to that? How do you take that into account? So I think accepting this new reality is the first thing. And then thinking about it and planning it today, not thinking that, as I said, it's going to be better tomorrow, but just saying, hey, what should I do now if this stays for 12 or 24 months? I think that's what I would kind of try and say.
Hey, Nicholas.
I'm a bit of a
here.
pessimistic, maybe. I'm sorry. I'm still an optimist. Alexander will vouch that I'm an optimist, but I'm just talking from a planning perspective. But I'm an optimist by heart.
Thank you.
Hey guys, Thomas here from Thomas Bitar from Brazil. Hi Alex. Hey. Hi Nicholas. Nice meeting you all, guys, and great to be here in this that you organized this. This is amazing. I missed a few of our OPM meetings already, and I really regretted and missed it. It's difficult to find and organize ourselves. And Michelle actually saved me to come in here because she sent this last minute email saying, guys, the call is starting. And so anyways, great. Thanks for the great presentation, Nicholas. And I don't have much of a question, but more something to share, if you allow me, which
Please.
is basically, I don't know if you guys read already the book called Ready Player One. Ready Player One. Have you read it, Nicholas?
I haven't.
Not,
I've heard. Yeah.
Okay, I strongly recommend. There is a movie, but the movie you cannot understand what really is going on. It doesn't reflect the book because it's too complex and it's too cool, too amazing. The book to put it in a movie, even though I think it was Spielberg. I tried to watch the movie and I stopped it. So basically, you mentioned about the virtual reality, right? And I think it's an interesting exercise, interesting to do. I had all the devices, all the VR devices, just because I like it, and I think it's interesting to follow technology trends. And I have been investing in technology as a venture capital, as Alex knows, for the past now 6 years. But all my life, I invested in technology just for the fun, as an angel investor, working in M&A. And I'm also part of a family business in retail, by the way, and finance. But anyways, the Ready Player One and the virtual reality is more of my provocation here. That is, the guy is in a room and the world around is destroyed. There's nothing left. There's only a fight for energy. So it's like a pandemic. It's not in the scenario of a pandemic, but the world is down. All the systems are down because of the environment and everything polluted. And the only way to have a quality of life is living in this virtual reality gear, but it's a full gear. It has a haptic suit, haptic gloves, so you can touch, you can feel, you can smell, and you have a room, in a little room in somewhere hidden, where you live actually the world. You make money, you work, you have everything. So my provocation here, and just as a coincidence, I'm actually pitching today for a fund in the IoT segment, focused in Brazil, and we're going after this fund here with great partners. And so basically it makes me think here, and I wanted to hear perhaps your thoughts about the virtual reality. We invested in a company in Brazil that is actually already global, it's in LA, also in Europe present. They have some games in virtual reality called Pixel Ripped. We invested in them and they are having a great success, partnership with Sony and whatnot. And so I wanted to hear your view about this trend. If you think the virtual reality, mixed reality, or augmented reality, the trends of VR, AR, MR will actually accelerate now with these? And if yes, how do you see those? And yeah, that's basically the question or the provocation here for the group.
I'll take a stab, and then maybe, I think I'd love to hear everyone else's insights, because, again, the idea is, and if I said anything that someone did not agree with, I'd love to hear about it, because that's the whole idea as well. I'd like to take as much take-home value as I can as well. I think, that's why I put it there. I think there's going to be, we've spoken a lot about augmented and virtual, and, we had the glasses and everything. And the reality is that for the moment, it's been a very slow adoption curve. So early adopters have tried it, and it hasn't really gone any further. I think now, through a number of reasons, it's going to accelerate and become much more common. Now, we might not actually realize it, because, that's the beauty of augmented. Virtual, of course, is different, but augmented, at least, is we don't necessarily see it. But I think gaming is one thing that's gone through the roof through this crisis. I'm sure you've seen that, everybody's been playing games, and, some games have been, downloaded in a few days, millions of times. I think gaming is going to push that as well, because gaming is always pushing virtual reality, and it's the first place where it will kind of become normal. So I think that's going to accelerate that trend. And then I think, as I say, brands will need to kind of create a more full online, and there shouldn't be really a distinction as when a brand communicates between an offline and online. It should just be kind of an integrated communication. But the whole new digital experiences, new kind of native digital experiences. And the best way for that is to really engage through augmented reality. And so I think virtual is one thing, but I think that the leap into that will be augmented. And I think that's going to accelerate as brands learn new ways to communicate through digital means. So yeah, that's my view on it. So I agree. I think it's just we've just won 5 years in that, if that's Thomas.
Okay, thanks. Great. Good point.
Hi, sorry, I'm commuting still, but so Antonio from Portugal. I'm in the construction industry. So I would just like your view or your comment about when we see this crisis, it happened so fast and so quick. And we're talking about changes in consumption habits and so on. But when I look at climate change, which is something that's happening very subtly, and but I see that it will have very huge impact. How do you see the difference, and how will that play into the habit changing and consumer habits, since it's something that's not like a health crisis that happened like this one happened so synchronized all over the world? How do you see the climate change impacting the world?
I mean, I said earlier, I'm normally an optimist, but on this particular one, actually, unfortunately, I'm not. I think that this pandemic, you know, has been talked about for many, many years. The WHO was created for this. Governments were supposed to kind of prepare for this. Nobody really did. I think it's a good example of, you know, something in which, you know, humans generally react. So I think the good news, however, is that it's shown, COVID has also shown that when we do react, we react very fast and we put all our means together and then we start getting creative, right? So I think a few things. One is, I fear that the whole climate change, I mean, you know, Greta, unfortunately, is going to be the biggest hater of COVID-19 because she knows that now that whole kind of agenda is just pushed, and, you know, they're just now talking of pushing a climate change conference to next year instead of this year. And I think, you know, the focus is going to be on getting economy banks up to where they were. Oil is going to be cheap. And so investing in carbon-free technology or anything like that from government perspective, they won't have the means to fund it, right? A lot of climate change is really linked to fundamentally changing energy grids, to fundamentally changing energy industries. I mean, the governments aren't going to be putting money there now. They've just got so much debt and they're just going to continue wave after wave probably over the next 12 months to take on more debt. So I think in the short term, unfortunately, from a government perspective, I fear that, you know, that agenda has gone. From a consumer standpoint, I hope that, you know, this has brought around some consciousness. I think it has brought around consciousness about the planet and about, you know, how dependent we are on the planet and on everything that includes. And I think that people have realized, so from a consumer standpoint, I think it is top of mind now. I just hope that we don't just push it back as soon as we can go back to some sense of normal, because unfortunately humans have also a capability to forget very quickly. And, you know, that's one of our strengths, but that's also something that in this case is you know, will have big impacts. So that I say governments, I fear won't be doing much for 2 to 3 years. Consumers, I think, are conscious of it now. But, you know, will they revert back to the normal as quickly as they can? That is a risk on that part as well. But I think brands will kind of integrate sustainability as part of their values, part of that mission. So I think brands have a lot to do in this. And then lastly, I think, you know, on the more positive side, I just, you know, we've seen how that if the world reacts in unity, how fast it can kind of cope with anything that is kind of imposed on it. And so as much as I fear climate change will not, we will have the impacts faster than if we had not had COVID-19. I think that it also shows that when we react in a united way, we can actually be very creative in finding solutions. So yeah, long-winded answer, sorry for that.
Thank you.
And
good. Right, Alex, we still got time for a question?
Sure, no, shoot. I was gonna shoot the question if there was no one. Go.
Great.
Nick.
I'm Nick Armstrong. I'm based in South America, in Ecuador. I'm in the agricultural and well, up to a certain point, consumer good sector as well. So I had a two-part question. The first is based on your views about South America, Latin America in general. I understand, I'm not sure if you had any sort of investment experience down in this part of the world, but how do you see How do you see, in general terms, Latin America or South America bouncing back from this? Do you see it in line with Southeast Asia's recovery? Do you think it's gonna be kind of left behind, or keeping up the pace in terms of a general economic recovery? And more specifically, I understand from your bio that you were an investor in Chewy in the pet food sector. We are a player in fact, in Ecuador, we're the leading player in the pet food sector. We're producers, retailers, and we're now e-retailers as well. Literally, we launched our e-commerce site a month ago, but it seems that everybody has done the same thing at the same time, kind of thing. So it's turning into a bit of a. I don't know if you can give me any sort of insight into trend going forward in that sector. Are you still invested in that?
Well, I'll answer both questions, and I'll get to that second. But we're no longer. We actually sold it to PetSmart, so that was a great investment. But we're actually looking at a few opportunities as well in this part of the world. Listen, I think, and I don't know here because, to be honest, I've never invested in South America, so it's just a perception from the outside, and so I may be really wrong, and apologies if that is the case. My feeling is that the impact will be the same in Asia and in South America, but the way that the countries rebound, Asia might be faster, and a reason for that is politically, I think, South America to some extent is a bit more unstable, if I can say. So, if you look at India, well, you've got a very strong man, Modi, but, he's going to do what he needs to do, and he's not going to move for the next few years. If you look at Indonesia, he's just been re-elected. He's kind of, reacted a bit late, but he is reacting. And Vietnam, I mean, all of these countries, it's the same. And of course, China, not to mention. And so I think they've got kind of a solid political kind of block that was not going to change over the next few years. And so, whatever measures need to be taken, they can take without too much social unrest about finger pointing, blaming, and elections coming up and all of that. I fear that in South America, I mean, I don't know every country perfectly, but if I look at Brazil, if I look at a few others, of course, right, that is going to be more of an issue, I think. And so there might be a bit more unrest in the country. And so, of course, that creates issues as to speed of recovery, because you need to be able to take fast measures, fast action. And so that's my fear a bit for South America today, if you want, is that not every country has reacted in the best way because they don't always have, the right things in place. So that's on South America. On Chewy, we were investors for 24 months. Listen, I think what you're going to see, and I would, and you say you're agriculture as well, I think connecting directly with your consumer, if you're a producer or manufacturer now, is a real thing you should consider. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't go through your other typical retail channels, but even from your agricultural perspective, maybe too early in Ecuador, but I mean, I'm seeing it now in Indonesia. We're looking at this company called Sayurbox, which is just basically, sourcing directly from all of the farmers and selling directly to the consumer, and then intermediary. Now, that's a great play. And so I think as well on the pet food side, it's the same trends. I think that the trends are everywhere in the pet food sector are the same. Humanization of pets, which means we're giving them better food than we were 5 years ago, and we're going to give them even better food 5 years from now as we were giving them today, because pets are really part of the family. And so as we are getting more conscious about health and well-being for ourselves, well, it's a member of the family, right? So as much as I'm going to feed my children better, I'm going to continue, if I can, of course, given my means, to feed my pets better. So I think that's an ongoing trend that we've seen it with Chewy, and that we're going to see across the whole kind of as we kind of consider pets more and more as children. I think the secret of Chewy was twofold. One is unique engagement with the customer. So Chewy was known as being the pet lover. So if you can differentiate yourself vis-a-vis the others by content, by having them call your call center and spending 45 minutes with them on the phone talking about their dog, just stupid example. Chewy sent every single pet a Christmas card. Okay, so we're talking millions of pets, right? So every year, handwritten card. They'd start in September, writing for every single dog. Okay, so just that kind of real engagement, because but that's how you keep a customer for life. So that's one. So really kind of how can I engage with my customers and be more relevant to them than others, on top of just selling different products. So if you're as well manufacturing products, then you can have a difference as well on that side. And then the other one is execution on the digital side. So, just get a guy who knows what he's doing. Digital is not just, hey, I'm just going to kind of get a low-level 32-year-old and it's going to happen, right? Digital is a whole strategy, and you really need to get guys, and you probably do know this because you mentioned you were an investor as well, right? But you need to get the right team, and it's all about execution. It's all about CAC. It's all about engagement, retention, conversion. I mean, it's all very, so I think it should not be just a part strategy. It should be a full-on strategy, if I can say, and it's worth investing more to attract the person who can make it go from 1% of sales to 25% of sales than investing less in that. And it's a people-driven business, right? So it's not yes, it's technology, but ultimately you need to bring the right talent.
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
Does that answer your question, Nick?
It does. It's given me a lot to think about. Thank you.
Good, super. Nick, I know that also a few members of the group who are in fundraising modes, and in general, how do you deal with your investors in circumstances like those? Because you also have very different reactions among your investor group, different types of investors, different mindsets. How do you deal with that? What are you observing among entrepreneurs who do it well, and what will trigger an investor to feel more confident to potentially invest if needed, as a new investor or an existing investor? Any comments on that?
Yeah, well, so everybody knows I'm actually going through this myself because I'm fundraising for the first time in this beautiful period called COVID. So it's not been that easy. I think it's a number of things. One is if you're trying to fundraise, or if you need to fundraise, I think try and focus on existing relationships. That's one. I mean, and I know it sounds stupid, but for a new person to invest in a company today that it's never met the person, human interaction is so critical, right? So if you haven't met the person, it's going to be very hard for you to trust him. I mean, we can do as much as we can over Zoom, but it will never replace that. So just try, if you already have that luck, just try and focus as much as you can on existing relationship, trying and going and creating new ones. It's going to be a much longer process. Two, just try and reflect, how am I, just, in your pitch, try and address, how am I reacting to COVID? How am I better positioned than others? I think it's some companies that we're seeing fundraising are kind of doing so well at fundraising because, they got lucky. I talked about Byju's, or I talked about, the company that we're seeing now in Australia, Alexander, they've had their best month ever, okay, because of COVID. So in that case, it's relatively easy. For others that are not in that case, which is the majority, unfortunately, I think addressing how you are ahead of the curve in your industry relative to adapting to COVID, because what you have done or because of what you are intending to do is very important. So that's one. Two, another one I think is be kind of realistic about valuations, and maybe raise less now if you don't want to take the dilution. But to some extent, I think that the reality is, unfortunately, fundraising is going to take much longer than it took before. It depends on the industry in which you are. But again, diligence, as you can imagine, I'm now stuck here in Singapore. I'm looking at a company in India. I need to go and do due diligence. Well, how the hell am I going to do that over the next 3 months? And so even if I actually have a positive intent now to go and look at that company, I would have to do 2 weeks of quarantine when I fly there and then 2 weeks on the way back. It's just, not feasible. And so for me, unfortunately, I don't see how I can feel credible myself investing in the company without having met the person, right? I mean, it's just, that's not how so I think we have to adapt to the new normal and take that into account. So that's why I think existing relationships, how are you positioned relative to COVID, relative to your industry? and how are you better positioned than others, or how you're going to position be better than others. Be realistic on valuation, and maybe if it's, you know, hard, accept maybe just not saying, hey, I'm not going to raise 10 or 50, I'm going to raise 5 or 25, so that, you know, I can take a lower valuation now, which then might kind of actually bring people on board easier or faster.
You know, other situation that several members of the group are considering is acquisitions. You know, as they see some competitors or players in the industry struggling. Some are really considering a buy and build strategy, or basically strategic acquisitions. Any reflection on that? I know it's very, you know, it depends on so many circumstances, but in terms of a strategic approach to the current circumstances.
I would say, I'm just writing a few things down. I would say distressed, you know, I mean, there's the different type of, you know, there's distressed. If you're looking at distressed, just do stuff that you know inside out. And so by that, I mean, just buy something that you really, really well, because it's probably going to be hard to do a lot of as much diligence. And so, you know, you know, we did this, Alexander, when we started buying up different education assets, and we then after realized, oh, actually every education asset that we bought, although we thought it was all education asset, everyone has amazingly different underlying fundamentals, drivers, you know, whatever, right? And so just buy something that you know, which is very close to your industry. I think that's a you know, or in your industry, so you know you're not going to have any surprises. I think that's kind of one. And if you have cash in these times, you know, cash is really king, right? And so valuations have come down. And so if you're doing a buy and build, you know, and again, I would try to focus on companies which, you know, either you've been dancing for a long time, and so you know them and you've been engaging with them, or just focusing on companies that are extremely similar to yours, so you can integrate very quickly. And because it's very hard to know the real impact, you know, as we've been discussing from the beginning. Is this going to be a 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months? Well, who the hell knows? So just try and make your assumptions on you know, on a L-shaped recovery, and not on a U or a V, and so that at least you're prepared to, you know, in case the worst happens, that you don't come up with any surprises. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Any more questions? Okay. Well, I mean, thank you so much, Nick. It's great we got the opportunity to hear from your experience, your read, your perspectives, and thanks everyone for the great questions. I found it really a very interactive debate, and a very interesting sum of perspectives. So thanks a lot.